Hi, my name is James Knight. Some of you have probably heard of me. I started Yacht Tech back in 2000, and I had a customer who bought a Nordhavn 46 back then. I think he put the order in 99, and the boat came in 2000, and I got involved in that Nordhavn commissioning process and delivered the boat to Annapolis, that Nordhavn 46, number 65, and I became a believer in Nordhavn. And since then I have worked on a lot of them. So it's been 20 years, and I'm here today in Palm Beach Gardens on a Nordhavn 57. It's hull number 9. Got my son behind the camera. He has grown up around Nordhavns. His first trip on a Nordhavn was when he was in a carry cradle, and it was on Egret, Scott and Mary Flanders' boat. We went to pick it up in Savannah, and Matthew came along and got his I won't say his sea legs because he wasn't walking, but my wife and I brought him along on the trip. Anyway, I'm here today. Matthew's behind the camera, and I thought I would spend a little bit of time just talking to you about Nordhavns. In particular, this one. A lot of people ask me the question, what would I buy if I was going to buy a Nordhavn? And there are different answers for that depending on who I was going to take with me and whether the kids had left home, and that's getting close now. So if it was just my wife and I think the Nordhavn 57 would be close to the top of the list. It's become increasingly more difficult to answer that question over the years because Nordhavn, Jeff Leishman and Nordhavn have built some amazing boats, and as the years have gone by, I'm lucky enough that I've got to work on bigger and bigger boats. And and some of those big boats are pretty nice to be at sea on. So, when you've done the number of trips that I've done on Nordhavns, the number of days at sea and cruises that I've done on all the different models, it just becomes tough because being out there on a 76 is something else. But many times when people have asked me the question, what would my favorite Nordhavn be, the answer was a 57. And so I thought I would come here today and talk about that and the reasons for me choosing the 57 to be at the top of the list. So I'm going to take you around the boat. I'm going to show you some of the things that you won't find on other boats, other Nordhavns. And I'm going to talk about some of the equipment down there and the space and the challenges with the 57. But on the whole, the reason that almost all, I would say, 57 owners love their boats is because of the performance. I pulled out some drawings back there that I laid out on the couch from when Jeff Leishman was designing this boat back in 95, 96. It was one of their real early designs. It's a much lower profile boat than the later models. It is a challenge sometimes to sell the 57. They discontinued it back in probably 2005 or 6, I think, because some of the newer models had more space, more glitzy, and the 57 died out. But the lower profile boat looks right. It has a nice long keel. It has, of course, the bulbous bow on it, and at sea she shines. 325 horsepower lugger, 6125 Komatsu block, which is an amazing engine. It was removed down the line and replaced by a John Deere 6125, and then ultimately I think they put in a couple of 1276s, lugger 1276s, which I think is probably the ultimate engine for any Nordhavn. There was an N14, Cummins N14, I think, in one of the 57s. They did build some twins, but the single engine 57 is by far the most efficient Nordhavn that they built, I believe. And that actually was pretty much proven a couple of years ago. We organized Bernie Francis organized a transatlantic. We prepared most of the boats to go. There was a 52, there are a couple of 55s, there was a 60, there was a 57. Anyway, the 57 had to slow down to allow everybody to keep up, pretty much, and was by far the most fuel efficient boat crossing the Atlantic. So this boat, in my experience, and I've done a lot of trips on 57s. You know, it's pretty much a 4-day trip from here to New York, Palm Beach Gardens to New York, if you get the weather right. 57s and 62s alike, same power, same kind of speed. On the 57, you'll be making about 9 knots at about 1800 RPM and burning about a gallon a mile. So 1 gallon a mile at about 9 knots. And you'll burn about 1,000 gallons to get from here to New York. So for some of you that may seem like a lot, but boy, this is a big heavy boat, and that's pretty fuel efficient. So she carries about 2,000 gallons, and if you slow her down, you can get 3,000, maybe even 4,000 miles out of a tank of fuel. So you know, if you drop the speed down to 5.5, 6 knots, you can really increase that range. On the flip side, if you try and get the boat up to 10 knots, or what they say she'll do, which is 11 in the paperwork, and I don't believe it, 11 knots is pushing it. You know, you might get 10.5. Definitely in the Gulf Stream you can go quicker, but through the water probably 10.5 knots is about max. And if you push the boat to 10.5 knots, you're burning about 16 gallons an hour, maybe even 17. So for that extra knot, it costs you about 7 gallons an hour. So you can see the curve is pretty steep. The 57, one of the few boats in the early years to have a stand-up engine room. Unlike the 62, of course, the 62 is a crawl around, kneel up. You know, if you're very short, you can stand up. But the 57, I remember going to a boat show. Joe Meglin hired me to move a 57 back from the Fort Lauderdale boat show, I think probably in 2002, maybe 2001, 2002. And he took a chance on me because he didn't know if I could drive a boat. But I took that 57 back. And I remember when I got on the boat after the Fort Lauderdale boat show for Joe, there was a whiteboard in the engine room. It was 57 number 11. And that was the first 57 I'd worked on. And the whiteboard had a big note across it saying, "This is by far the cleanest, most organized, and nicest engine room in the Fort Lauderdale boat show." Somebody had written that and put big exclamation points after it, and I always remember that because for a 57-foot boat, the engine room on here is truly amazing. I'll take you down there in a couple of minutes. We'll have a quick look around. I don't want to extend the video too long. I don't want people to get bored, but yes, the engine room is stand-up. And you've got a couple of maintenance strakes down there on the sides of the main engine, so you can get to everything. You'll see the generators are easy to get to. You can pull the boards up and get to the shaft. It's got a 16.5-foot prop shaft, 3-inch. Of course, I've been in the service business on Nordhavns now for 20 years. I've only been selling them for about 10, actually 12. But so I've pulled these boats to pieces. I've pulled the shafts out of many Nordhavn 57s, and it is not a 2-person job. Pulling that 16-foot 3-inch shaft out is a 3 to 4 person task. It is a big, heavy monster. In the early days, Nordhavn did have some issues because that's a long shaft with shaft whip. So the early boats didn't have an intermediate bearing. They put the bearing in. They played around with 4 to 6 engine mounts on the main engine. We know that 57s can be a little bit of a challenge to get the alignment right on. I've worked on it many times and brought 57s in and put them right. There are 3 contact points. You've got the cutlass bearing at the back end of the shaft, right just in front of the prop. You've got the intermediate bearing, and of course you've got the point at which the coupling attaches to the transmission. So 3 points to get in line, whereas most Nordhavns only have, the smaller ones anyway, only have 2 points. You've got the cutlass bearing and the coupling. So a 57 does present some challenges, and you know, there are many times that I've been out on them where they've had a little bit of a wobble. And we can usually make that go away, but they're not the smoothest running boat. As far as having a little vibration, it's not uncommon on a 57. But there are so many things about the 57, the way she rides out in the big waves. I remember crossing in 57 number 19 to Bermuda a few years ago. We got her ready to cross the Atlantic, and I took her out. And coming into Bermuda, a couple of days out of Bermuda, the weather picked up, and I hate to admit that I get seasick, but I got seasick, and I was lucky enough the owner's wife had some patches. But I remember waking up on the starboard side of the Salon there and looking out of the windows up at these big walls of water, and the boat was riding up on these big seas. I mean, just no concern at all. I mean, big ocean, but boy, the 57 just walks it. You know, it's like a walk in the park, and just so huge amount of confidence in the way these boats ride. I have spent many hours back here laying in the back of the Salon on the floor, because this is by far the most comfortable spot on the boat when it comes to being in big seas. One of the things about this 5709 is that she has a head right here. This is quite unusual. There were a few 57s that had it. It is nice if you're out in big seas. You can use the head back here rather than having to go forward. So that's a nice feature on this one. You're not going to find this on very many of the 57s though. 3 or 4 maybe had it. I know that number 18 had it. And we sold one recently, and Anna Cortez, White Raven, she had a head there in the galley area. Challenges with 57s: if you're short, it's quite difficult to reach the cabinets here. Some people keep little step stools in the galley. The galley is fairly small. You know, the 55 was probably the boat that took over from the 57. 55 sold like hotcakes. It's a very glitzy boat. Very capable also, much taller, not as low profile as the 57. And you do notice the difference when you're out in big seas. Not saying they're not capable, but they aren't the low profile, heavy, bulbous bow, long keel boat that this is. This 57 steers like it's on rails. You will find that some of the other models don't steer as well. They're all different. Again, they're all very capable, but it sure is a breath of fresh air to get behind the wheel on this 57. You can let go of the wheel and she'll run in a straight line, and it feels good. So yes, the galley is a little bit small compared to some of the boats, but it's got everything you need. It's got a full-size Sub-Zero refrigerator, which is nice. You've got a freezer also down here, and this boat has a dishwasher, a trash compactor, full-size oven, and one of the nice things, and you may think this is crazy, and some people will probably admonish me for saying this, but one of the nice things about having this door right here, when you're preparing dinner and you're cutting vegetables and what have you, it sure is nice to be able to throw them out the door over the side. Vegetables, that's all, no plastic. So but that's a nice feature. And also, you know, when you're at anchor and you're preparing meals, you know, it's hot with this oven running. This is a really nice feature, because you can be cooking, you've got the door open, the boat's swinging on the hook, and you've got a nice breeze coming through the door. I love having this door here. Okay, so let's take a quick wander down into the engine room. I'm going to make it short. Matthew's already telling me my video is probably going to be too long and people are going to get bored. I don't know how well. If you really like 57s, you're probably going to be watching like a hawk. So if you can continue putting up with me and talking about boats for a little bit longer, there's a few more things about this 57 that I love. One is this. So you can close this door to the Salon. It's on a catch right here, but we can close that up, and we can open this door, which means if you've got technicians coming and going from the boat and you're living on board, they don't have to come traipsing through the Salon or the galley or whatever. You've got access to come right down into the engine room, drag your tools in and out. You don't have to come through the boat. That is super nice. And also, if you're on a long trip and it's flat calm and you want to cool the engine room down, I've often run with this door wide open. This one closed, this door open the engine room door, you let all the heat out, and then you can come down here, do your engine room checks. It's not quite as hot. Nordhavn was never very well known in their early boats for engine room temperatures and ventilation. It's okay, it's pretty basic. We got some Dayton blowers in here that keep the air moving. It's a naturally aspirated engine room, really. We've got big vents at the back of the engine room that let air in. We've got a couple of blowers here that we do have issues with. You know, they don't last forever. They're regular Dayton blowers. They rust, and we change them out once in a while. But they're easy to get. We buy them from Granger, and they're fairly bulletproof. So the engine, as you can see, is slap bang in the middle here. We've got these maintenance strakes. You'd have to see the bottom of the boat to understand. They're little bulges in the bottom of the boat that allow you to stand. And I'm not tall. I'm not as tall as Matthew, but I can happily stand up here. Oh, Matthew's going to prove me wrong now. He can't stand without without crouching. I've been watering him too much. But you know, I can stand here. I can work on the injection pump. I can work on the the air filter, I can do oil changes, I can get down there. The other day I was underneath one of these engines, laying down here, squeezed in with my hands and rags and what have you, getting down, cleaning out underneath. I mean, you have great access all around to this Komatsu 6125, Lugger 6125. It is a workhorse. So, you know, people start asking me about the hours on these engines. You've heard it before, I'm sure. These engines are going to outlive us all. They are fairly bulletproof, you know, as long as you keep doing your oil changes. You change your alternators once in a while. We've got one right now on a 62 that we worked on a few weeks back. We changed out the alternators. We put in a new water circulating pump. The boat's crossing the Atlantic. That boat, number 15, 62 number 15, she's been around the world already. And not only has she been around the world, but when she got back, I worked on the boat. I got called in. There was a lightning strike on the boat, and I got called in probably back in 2005. I think Dan Streech sent me over there to work on that boat. And you know, we got the lightning deal taken care of, and the new owner bought the boat, and I cruised it up to Maine and back and up and back, and did several trips on that boat, and then sold it for him to the next owner who cruised in the Bahamas. Long story short, I think she's got 8,000 or 9,000 hours on the Komatsu. Same engine, exactly the same, 325 horsepower, and we're getting ready to send her across the Atlantic. The owner wants to spend 2-3 years in the Med cruising around. Not an issue. It doesn't burn a drop of oil. Might leak a little bit here and there. You know, they all leak. There's no such thing as a completely leak-free engine, but as long as it's not burning it. Now, I will say they are a little sooty. You know, one of the things that you have to understand if you're getting a dry stack is it is impossible not to get any soot in the stack. And it depends a little bit on how you drive the boat as to how much soot you get in the stack, but you are going to have a soot issue once in a while. It's just, you know, it's the nature of the beast. There's arguments for a dry stack, there's arguments against a dry stack, there are arguments for and against wet exhaust too. Against the dry stack would be the soot. Everything else really is positive. I've never had to replace a muffler in a 57 yet. You know, some of the smaller boats with the mild steel mufflers, yes, I've had to do it, but I haven't done a 57 yet, so I'm sure the day is coming, but I haven't done it yet. So we didn't talk about this. First of all, we got a lovely workbench built in here with drawers for storage and a sink. There's a little sump down there. Of course, we're below the waterline down here. You can see the access to the stabilizer right there. I'll say the port stabilizer has really good access. Starboard one, not so much. But you can get to it. Little guy like me, open the door, crawl in. You can pull the stairs out and get to it. It's not as great as this one, but boy, this makes up for it, you know. If you're going to have a problem with the stabilizer, have a problem with the port one. Now, it is a Naiad, and I will say that there is no such thing as a leak-free Naiad system, and I'm going to get complaints from Naiad for saying that, but it's the truth. I've worked on Naiads. So there's an oil leak here. Not uncommon, okay? Don't worry about a little oil leak on a Naiad system. Oil lubricates things, and it also stops things from rusting, so a little bit of an oil leak isn't always a bad thing. So, the big thing here on the 57 and the 62 fuel manifold system is very, very similar. It's a bit daunting when you first look at it. I don't know if you can turn the camera down and look at this. When you come through the door, you know, if you're a first-time trawler buyer, you look at these manifolds and all these valves, and it's like, oh, what am I going to do with that lot? How am I going to understand it? And I normally, when I sell a Nordhavn to somebody, I spend a day or two going through systems or whatever they need, but usually we throw a couple of days in of training or teaching or answering questions mostly, and even with second or third or fourth time boat buyers, you know, there are always questions, and I love answering questions to the best of my ability. So, and I always spend a good amount of time going through these fuel manifolds. It really is quite simple. Not only is it simple, but it works really well. You can do pretty much anything with this fuel system. You've got a supply manifold, you've got a return manifold. So we've got our supply manifold here, we've got our return manifold here. Some people, first-time boat buyers, don't know much about diesel engines. They don't even know that diesel engines return fuel to the tank. They don't use all the fuel that they draw from the tank. Some of it, the fuel that they don't need, they return to the tank. So that all goes back through this return manifold. And then here we've got a transfer manifold. That allows us, the transfer manifold and the pump system on this boat allows us to take fuel from whichever tank we want. We've got 2,000 gallons of fuel roughly in 4 tanks. 1 tank either side of me here, and 2 tanks just ahead of the engine there. You can see all 4 sight gauges in the engine room, which is really nice when you're doing your engine room checks. When you're switching fuel tanks, you can see what you're doing easily. And so if you want to move fuel around, or if you want to push the fuel into a filter, or if you've changed the fuel filters on the engine and you want to bleed it, you want to push fuel through there and make sure that it's all bled before you start it up, you can do that with this system. You draw the fuel from whichever tank you want to. You can select any of the 4 tanks on the transfer manifold, send the fuel to the pump. You can then decide whether you want to send the fuel back through the return manifold and polish it, because anytime you move fuel it goes through a filter. Polish it back into one of the other tanks. You can put it back into the same tank, or you can send it to the supply manifold. You can close off the valves to the other tanks, and you can pressurize the supply manifold, and then you can send the fuel to any one of the 2 generators, the main engine or the wing engine, however you need to do it. It has saved me so much time. These kinds of things you can't do on some of the other Nordhavns. I won't tell you which ones, but the fuel systems are all different. Every Nordhavn is different. The 62 and the 57 have a very similar fuel system. The 62 doesn't have sight gauges on all the tanks because a lot of them are up forward under the floor, which, you know, presents a little bit of a challenge keeping fuel levels, accurate fuel levels, by way of a tank tender, which isn't my favorite piece of kit. But anyway, 57, you can see them. Sight gauges here and here, sight gauge there, sight gauge there. Easy to see. Got a water maker down here. You got the fuel. You got the water pump, the Mach 5. It's been upgraded to a Mach 5. It's also got a Headhunter Stingray pump back there. You know, there's a lot of good stuff on this boat. That's all been put in since the boat was built. We've got access here to turn our engine start batteries off. Engine start batteries are separate. They're up under the bed. By the way, just forward of here is the master stateroom. You wouldn't know it being in the master stateroom. This is thick. The sound insulation is fantastic. What else? So at the back here we've got really good access to the generators. As you can see, I don't know if you can come around the corner there. Aquaholic here is all opened up. She was at a boat show recently, and so she's opened up so you can see these generators. It does look like there's been a leak at an injector pump here some time ago. You can see it's a little yellow there. That is not uncommon. In fact, there are 3 things on these generators that I always look for that are failure points. One is the injection pump, and it usually does not fail. It starts to weep, and that's what happens. You've got yellow staining there, and eventually it gets worse and worse, and you can still run it, but it's going to be leaking diesel, and the seals in the injection pump go bad. People run these with their sound shields on them. They get very, very hot inside. It shortens the life of the injection pump. So it's a simple injection pump off, back to the injection shop. They reseal them. We put them back on. So that's one of the things that goes bad on these. But as you can see on this 57, super easy to get to them. Super easy to do that maintenance task. You can get into the exhaust elbow. You can see that's been done on this boat. The exhaust elbow right in here. I don't know if you can see that. It's stainless steel. That, of course, is another weak point on the Northern Lights generator. They come with a mild steel exhaust elbow. They always rust out and they fail. They crack and they split, and that will stop you dead. So, because you'll be spraying salt water out the exhaust elbow. Usually you can catch it before that, but some people don't look back there. Too many people don't look back there. So that's another thing that can cause a problem on the generator. Then we've got a few sensors in there. There's shutdown circuits, and there's one particular sensor in there that I try and tell people always carry as a spare. It's the coolant, high temperature coolant shutdown sensor that often fails, and if that fails, the generator won't stay running. You can bypass it if you know what you're doing. Always good to have a spare on board. Good to change your coolant out regularly, and then you probably won't have an issue with your coolant shutdown sensor. But people tend to go past their coolant change interval, and then they'll have a problem. One more thing, air filters tend to get neglected. The air filters inside here, and those air filters tend to get they're foam, and they get hot, and they break down. And if you've ever worked on a foam air filter on a dirt bike or a four-wheeler or something like that, you've probably seen them. They crumble in your fingers. That's a problem because the crumbling filter gets sucked into the air intake. It goes up into the intake manifold, and the generator's smoking and nasty. Anyway, changing filters, changing fuel filters, doing all of that service on the 57 is fantastically easy. The raw water pump. Usually they don't fail. They do start to drip a little bit. Of course, you can tell if they've been dripping because they turn green underneath. This one is not. This one probably just had a little bit of weepage from the top. Maybe somebody took the hose off and it got salt water on here, which is why it turned green. But you can see it's been changed. And it is not leaking from underneath, though, otherwise it would be green down here. So that one looks good. The filters have been changed. These generators are in good shape. The belts have been done. I can tell you one thing about the owner of this boat. He is a mechanic, he's a race car driver, he understands engines. He's really done an amazing job. I mean, this is an old boat. We're talking 20 years old. And it's remarkable when you go around and look at it as to how nice it has been kept. So down here we got great access to the shaft. This is the intermediate bearing that I was talking about, so that's a pillar block bearing there. It is a failure point. We last year I had a call from a customer who was crossing the North Atlantic on their 57, and one that I had sold some years ago. Anyway, they had somebody work on that intermediate bearing in Norway or Denmark, somewhere over there. And there are some pretty tight tolerances. When you set these up, it has to be set up as a floating bearing, because this shaft moves back and forth with the engine mounts. When the engine mounts are soft, of course, when you put the engine into gear, the whole prop, shaft, and engine, everything moves back and forth. This has to allow for a little bit of tolerance, a little bit of end play there, as you put the engine in and out of gear. If you don't have those tolerances set up correctly, this sucker's going to get hot. Inside there are some big bearings. We have some in stock on the shelf over at the shop, and those bearings will get hot and eventually will fail. You know, if you're running this boat for a week solid, it's one of the things that I tell people, you should be looking at that on your engine room checks. You come down here, you check that. You come back here and you got your temperature gun, you check the packing gland back there as well. Keep an eye on that. All very easily accessed. You got a packing gland on the wing engine here, easily accessed. As you can see, that one looks like it could do with a little bit of extra packing in it, but probably fine. The wing engine on this boat powers the thrusters. Back in the early days, the early 57s, they did not have two hydraulic pumps. There's a hydraulic pump on the main that powers the stabilizers. Separate system. It's a NIAD stabilization system. I think it's got 254s on this boat. They are not ABT. The later 57s, they went with ABT for the stabilizers and the thrusters. This boat has American bow thruster, and the PTO on the back of the wing engine is what drives that. What else have we got? We got an oil change system back in there. We got the reservoir back in the corner, back over here for the bow thruster system. That's a cooler for the thruster tank. All again very, very easily accessed, right? I mean, I can get in here, I can check the temperature of the tank. Oil looks nice and clean. Fill there. You get in the cooler here to take the end off and check and clean the cooler out. You got over here, you've got the davit pump. It's got a 220 volt electric hydraulic davit, so that runs off of the generator. We got the inverter system here, one inverter running off of each leg. These are SW series inverters. They are pretty bulletproof. They are getting old, and we have spares in the shop. And so we have changed some out on some of the boats that are crossing the Atlantic and going over to the Med, just to get new pieces of equipment in, because again, they're 20 years old. But you know what? They are bulletproof pieces of kit. These are big, heavy workhorses, and that's the kind of equipment that Nordhavn was using back there. I mean, I can't imagine how many of these things went into these Nordhavns. Hundreds and hundreds of them, because, you know, we've probably had 50 come through our shop, and we have a number of them, you know, pieces and parts of them on the shelf that we use to fix older ones. So anyway, access there is good. Access in, I'm not going to go into the lazarette right now, but I don't know if you can see in there, it's probably a little bit dark. I get back in there and you can check the steering rams, you can check all the steering gear, you can check the seal, all the batteries are back in here. By the way, this boat has all new air conditioners. I mean, the owner, just before he bought, because he bought a bigger boat, just before he bought the bigger boat, he went through and he stripped out every air conditioner, and everything is brand new. Not only the compressors, but the air handlers, all new. I turned on the air conditioning a second ago because I told Matthew it's a bit hot. And within about 2 minutes, the Salon was already starting to get cold. And here we are in South Florida. It's hot outside. So all of that is new. The owner has spent a lot of money on this boat doing things right. And okay, let's turn around. We're going to head back out. We'll head up to the pilot house. And on to the pilot house. So, fairly bulletproof controls. We've got Inortic. These are actually hydraulic controls for the main and the wing engine. You know, they're, like I said, they're fairly bulletproof, non-electronic, so we don't have to worry about lightning strikes or things like that. Bow and stern thruster controls. Got our main engine here. The main engine has 4,500 hours on it. So you know, some people think that 4,500 hours is a lot. But actually 4,500 hours is not very much. So we got our high nautic controls, bulletproof controls. They're actually hydraulic. We got our bound stern thruster. We got our main engine here with the additional 3-pack of gauges, which gives us a pyrometer, exhaust temperature, transmission pressure, and turbo boost gauge, I think. Turbo boost on this boat does not do very much, by the way. So, okay, and 4,500 hours. 4,500 hours. Not very much at all. This engine. Okay, so I was talking to a crab fisherman. Not to extend the video or anything, but I was talking to. I wasn't a crab fisherman. It was a lobster fisherman. I was on a 62 up in Maine, and the lobster fisherman comes up to me and he says, "Hey, what kind of power you got in that thing?" I'm always proud of the Nordhavn when I come up to the dock, and I always like to talk about it. So I told the guy, I said, "Hey, I got a love the boat. We just came in from Florida. You know, she's got a Komatsu 6125 lugger marinized." "Oh yeah, great engine, great engine." He says, "Yeah, I had one of those in one of my lobster boats, and it sank. I think the engine had like 35,000 hours on it and went down." Said we pulled it back up, pulled the wiring harness off it, cleaned the engine out, put it all back together again, and ran that thing for another 10 years and got, I don't know, 60,000 hours on that engine or something. I mean, something ridiculous. And that was after it had sunk. So, you know, that tells you the longevity of these engines. Wing engine hours, obviously light, 734. The good news is when you've got a hydraulic PTO on a wing engine, it does get used. So unlike some of the other boats that don't have PTOs on the wing engines, like the 40 over there, they tend not to get used very often, whereas this one gets used every time the boat goes out. The engine gets started. I recommend customers put them in and out of gear too. They don't always do that, but you know, the one shortfalling of that would be the coupling. There is a torsion coupling in there that tends to go bad. I'm sure it's been done on this boat already. They don't like to sit there rattling away at high RPMs with no load on the engine. It takes out the torsion coupling, but you know, that's an easy fix, especially on a 57 because you've got great access down there. So the electronics package on this boat is old. You know, the computer's been taken out, but that's an easy fix. Put a computer in there, put a computer navigation suite in there on the display. We got a backup navnet. Somebody's going to probably want to put some Garmin stuff in here or upgrade the electronics. It's got a really nice stereo system on it. We got the little electronics sub panel down there that's standard for a 57. I remember one of my first trips on that 5711. Back in there's some fuses, and I was messing around with the fuses because I was trying to learn the boat. And back in here there's a little 10 amp fuse that I don't see it. Oh yeah, right in here. So they're all a little bit different, but 5711s was further back, and it had a little bit of chewing gum wrapper stuffed in it. The boat was fairly new, and so I kind of looked at the chewing gum wrapper and I'm like, wiggled it, and the engine stopped, and then realized that that was for the engine shutdown system. Nice to have it labeled engine shutdown system. Most of these boats have that. So if there was an issue with the fire bottle in the engine room, the pressure releases, the fire suppressant comes out, the pressure releases, and it'll shut the engine off and the blowers and all of that. That's controlled by that little fuse in there. If you didn't know, I bet that's the kind of thing that I teach you when you buy a boat from me, and I go around and I show you all the little bits that you might not know. It's not in the manual, by the way. Another really awesome thing about these boats, this is a Dashing built boat, 20 years old. Look at that wiring. That is art. I mean, there aren't too many fingers that have been in here. You know, sometimes you get people come in and they chop and change, and I can usually tell when somebody's been in. I've done rewiring on these panels before. We've had some issues where I've had to rewire them, and I always try and make it look like factory so that you can't tell where somebody's been. I even pick my electrical terminals carefully so the colors match, so that when I've done an electrical terminal and crimp, you can't tell that I've been in there. That's not always the case. I can see people have used American crimp connectors in here. But anyway, generally speaking, this boat looks like it did when it came out of the factory. You know, pretty amazing wiring they did, and still continue to do. The woodwork, you know, this boat is 20 years old, and I'll tell you, the owner of the boat now, great guy, has looked after the boat, but he's used this boat. I mean, this boat has been back and forth to the Bahamas for family trips. I think he bought the boat maybe in 2006, and has used the heck out of it. I mean, and that's what boats are for, right? This boat knows its way around the Bahamas. It's spent a lot of time over there cruising around. I'm not sure if you noticed this. I forgot to mention it. Unusual, but it's there. If you want an extra bed in the pilot house, there it is. It folds down. There's a connection here to support this corner, and cushions have obviously been redone. They look pretty nice. So we got this Stid chair, which is super comfortable. It's a little worn on the arms, but you know what? It's got 4,500 hours on it, this chair. I love sitting in these chairs, by the way. They're good for your back, and I think the guy that designed them, that owns Stid, was an orthopedic surgeon or orthopedic somebody. Anyway, they lovely chairs, very expensive. This Speak Italian, I think it's an Italian company. The Clearview. You don't see too many boats with this. There is a 62 out there, hull number 7, I think, that has. I think it had a couple of Speak Clearviews in it. It's a rotational, centrifugal. That's an English word, by the way. Centrifugal. Force fly. Yeah, thank you. Centrifugal. The water flies off, and so you can see through it. It needs a good cleaning, and it also, I think, it has a heater element in there, so it'll keep the ice off if you go up into the ice fields. Generator controls. What do we got for hours on these? 3,500 and they're even 3,500 a piece. I think they're both 20 kWs. So that's actually not a lot of hours, and I can tell you, looking at those generators, they look great. Oil samples are necessary. I haven't seen the oil samples. Absolutely, I would do oil samples, but I would put money on the oil samples coming back good, and the generators have been taken care of. The exhaust elbows have been done. Obviously, the injection pumps have been done. They've been serviced. I have no issues with that. We've got a basic Naiad system. It's gyro. It's a gyro system, so there's a gyro on top of the fluid conditioner down there. I know that the fins, pretty sure that the fins have been serviced on this and the seals and what have you. There's no electronics in this system. It's a basic on-off center system. Auxiliary puts the controls up to the FlyBridge. You got a high temp and a low. It's very, very simple. They don't work quite as well as an ABT system. The reaction time is not as good, but they're bulletproof. There's really not very much to go wrong. So here we are in the master. The master stateroom on a 57 is, it's a bit of a cave. There's no question about that. The light down here is not great, and it does turn some people off. However, I got to tell you, it's in the middle of the boat, right? I mean, the engine room is right there. The sound level in here is amazingly light. You can sleep easily. It's in the middle of the boat. You're on the center line of the boat. There's no question that the back of the boat in the Salon is a better place to be in a rough head sea. But this center cabin is a nice place to be. It's quite spacious and comfortable. So Nordhavn has used in the past lots of different heads on the different boats. The Royal Flush head is a head that, I'm thinking now to try and figure out if they used it on any other models. But the Royal Flush definitely was the head of choice on the Nordhavn 57. Something about the 57 that people would never realize, but I do because I'm a service guy, is the sanitation system. And the holding tank and head and sanitation system is something, nobody really wants to talk about. Yes, they do go wrong once in a while. But the nice thing about the 57 is the Royal Flush head rarely goes wrong. That's the first thing. The run between the head and the holding tank, and by the way, you cannot flush these heads overboard. It just on a 57, it's not possible. These heads directly deposit their contents into the holding tank. There's no way around it. And the holding tank is right there under the floor, and the head is right here. So the distance between the head and the holding tank is 3 feet. I mean, it's right there. And then the other head, which is in the guest head on the starboard side right here, is also only about, the holding tank is right here under my feet, by the way. So you've got a Royal Flush head here, Royal Flush head there, and the contents drop right into the tank here. So the hose run on the 57, other than we've got a couple of anti-siphons under the stairs here, you can get to it all under the stairs, and of course it's lit. You can see that's actually the overboard discharge valve down there, which is closed, and up in there you got to climb in to get to it. But the hose runs from the heads down to the tank are very, very short. And as most of you boaters know, if you had a boat, holding tank and head smells are pretty awful. Well, on a 57, if there is any smell, it's really only under these steps and here down onto the floor here. You don't really notice it anywhere in the boat. And if you do have a smell, it's usually coming from the hoses. And if you want to change the hoses on a 57, it is a short, sweet job. Well, maybe not sweet, but it's short. Right, Matthew's done it. It's fairly easy. It doesn't take very long at all, as compared to a 47 or a 50 or a 55, where I swear, I mean, you could probably get through 100 feet of hose doing a 55. I mean, there's hose everywhere. And of course, when that starts to smell, we've done that too. And we'll do it for you. It's just the 57 is nice. So this boat has the little third stateroom. Some of the 57s have only 2 staterooms, and this area here would be the master head. On the 2 stateroom 57, that master is a full beam master, and the head and shower is up in here. On this boat, as you saw, the head was on starboard side, head and shower, and here we have a little guest stateroom, which is actually pretty nice. You know, I've spent plenty of time in this little stateroom, and some people might describe it as a coffin bunk, but you know what? It is quite cozy. I like it in here. I'm happy to be in here. I'll tuck myself away. No problem at all. And you got a hanging locker there. Decent size hanging locker. All cedar lined. And smells good. The varnishes, I mean, probably doesn't look that much different to when the boat was new. And by the way, the headliners have all been redone. Not by us, I'm afraid to say. You know, we love our headliners, right, Matthew? Somebody else did the headliners on this. They don't look quite like ours, but I will give them high marks. They did a nice job. It's not the same material that we use, but it looks pretty good. Down here, I was showing Matthew earlier, we got the water tank. We had it on the specs at 280 gallons. I'm like, I don't think so. Most 57s have a 400-gallon tank. This one, I looked it up. It looks like 300 gallons. Not quite sure why it's less than some of the later ones, but 300 gallons, and it's got a water maker, so that's okay. So the water tank is painted blue. You can see it down there. Put the carpet back down. And you can see again, it's got glossy varnish, which usually I'm not a big fan of glossy varnish, but you know, it actually looks pretty nice. And these carpets have obviously been redone. Carpets look really nice. Center line, queen. You can kind of walk around it to make the bed. You can't walk all the way around, but it's not bad. And then up here we've got access to the chain locker. And I've often, you know, wondered why we don't get more wood staining up here from the chain locker, because the windlass is right above here. But it does have this little rubber seal around it, but I just don't think you get a whole lot of water in there. You can see there's been a little bit of drippage in there, but a chain locker is a wet area. I mean, let's face it, you know, you got the anchor coming in there, it's always wet when it comes up. And so I have seen on a couple of 57s where the wood is stained black, but look, for a 20-year-old boat that spent a lot of its life cruising around in the Bahamas and obviously been at anchor, there is no wood damage. I mean, it looks gorgeous. So, the access to this head is from both sides. So you can, this bifold door type thing, you can get in from here and you can lock the other door, or you can come in from the other side. So both the crew cabin and the forward guest stateroom have access to the head from either way. You know, the shower does pump overboard. The one thing about the 57 that perhaps isn't so great, well, one less thing to worry about, I guess, it doesn't have a grey water tank. They never built the 57 with a grey water tank that I'm aware of. I've never worked on one with a grey water tank. There are a couple of 62s that have grey water tanks, but that also wasn't a big feature on the 62, no grey. So everything pumps overboard. Sinks drain overboard. They drain through a swing check valve, which sometimes gets stuck, which can be aggravating, but it's an easy fix. And the shower, which is below the waterline down there, has a little shower pump with a screen, so it catches soap scum and hair and stuff like that, which you've got to clean out once in a while, which can be a bit of an aggravation. But you know what? Most of the pumps we've replaced now with gulpers, and they don't even need a screen. I mean, they'll pump everything out. So that's just grey water going over the side when you're having a shower. No big deal. Storage up top. This can be a little annoying when you're in a head sea. These tend to slide back and forth and bang. There is a little bit of water damage here, you know, around this. That's probably more from condensation than anything. Doesn't surprise me. Again, 20-year-old boat. So, but the varnish and the finish and everything down here lovely.
It's pretty windy up here today, so I don't know if you're going to be able to hear me okay. Matthew says that his fluffy mic will take all the wind noise out. We'll see. Anyway, I'm not going to stay up here for very long. I've already said I probably talk too much. Everybody's getting bored, but there's so many things to talk about on a 57. And one of the things on the early 57s are these davits. I mean, take a look at this davit. This is an Aratex davit. 1,500 pound. It's not a 2,500. Actually, no, I think it's a 1,300 pound davit. Single ram. Okay, so Aratex is not the best davit in the world. However, there are a lot of things to like about Aratex davits. I mean, the first thing is, check it out. It still looks like the day it was made. I mean, come on, it's stainless steel. You polish it up, it looks like it's brand new. How many other davits are there out there on Nordhavns? And I hate to name names, but I'm going to. Steelhead, Marquip, Nick Jackson. I mean, how many of those look like this after 20 years? Okay, all right, so the mechanicals aren't so great. I get it. But we know how to fix them, right? The hoses need to be replaced, the seals in the rams, all of that kind of stuff. The pins, the cables, the swedges. You know, I get it. There's stuff to fix on them. But you know what? So you fix them, and they look like brand new still, and they function. And they're going to look like, that's going to look that way in another 20 years. Keep it polished, and I'll fix it for you once in a while. They are great davits, they really are, and it would be my choice, no question, to have an Aratex davit with a bunch of spare parts, because I know the davits really well. And I like to come out here and polish it and see my face in it once in a while. I don't want to have to come up onto the deck and sand corrosion and repaint every couple of years. So, that's my point on an Aratex davit. I'll take this. Corrosion. Okay, so the good, the bad, and the ugly. There is corrosion on this arch up there. I would like nothing more than to take that arch off and get it repowder coated. Or make a stainless one so that it looks like that Aratex davit. That's what it needs. I would like to take that off and repowder coat it. But you got to look at the Joko on this boat. I mean, the owner of this boat has this boat waxed. He had it wet sanded and buffed and waxed. So many times there are some thin spots, but it's amazing how beautiful the Joko is. You go around the outside of this boat. Not so much up here, it needs a little bit of help. But generally speaking, when you go around the outside of this boat, it looks like brand new.
So I think I forgot to mention the FlyBridge. We were looking at the davit and the boat deck and everything. There's lots of room up there. There is no dinghy with this boat. It was taken off, so we need to put chocks on there and a dinghy, whoever buys it, which is fine. The FlyBridge up there is, you know, it's got a great view of the whole boat. I love driving 57s from the FlyBridge. Easy to see what's going on. This boat handles beautifully, right? Bow and stern thruster, lots of power, in and out of gear. Will give you just in idle, give you everything you need to power this boat in, even when it's windy. A little bit. You actually have to be a little bit careful with the throttle, because you start giving it throttle, this is a racehorse, take off in a hurry. So, but Matthew was parking a 62. How old were you when we did that exercise? Maybe 14. You know, I had a customer looking to buy a boat, and we were on a 62, number 6229, which is now Lady K. I took Matthew, and I had this customer, and he said he was a bit worried about whether or not he'd be able to drive a boat. And I'm like, hey, Matthew, I don't think you'd ever done that, but I put him on the controls. And again, big 325 horse, I think that was a 340, but anyway, with bow and stern thrusters, and Matthew parked it in the marina. It's a bit like a video game, right, Matthew?
Yeah.
More to lose.
More to lose.
So, nice handhold up here when you're out here and the boat's moving around. This is interesting. I don't know if this was from new or not. I mean, I was on this boat way back when it was fairly new, and I don't remember this, whether somebody cut this in. I guess maybe it was there, but it's quite nice, I guess, if you're fishing back here, to have this cut out on the cap rail. Real nice heavy-duty handrails here. This is the standpipe for the davit. These are the air intakes for the engine room.
You can see, look at the I don't know if you can see on the camera, but
Yeah, you can.
gorgeous polished Jelco, you know. It is, like I said, it's a little bit thin in places. This is quite common on a 57, by the way. These, I've had to work on these before. These are inset pieces of glass, and then they put some cork around the edges and then Jelco over the top, and they often crack in these corners. Almost all 57s do it, not uncommon at all. Real heavy cap rails. I remember when Matthew's brother was with me in Old Port Cove when he was little. He's now 27. He was probably 6, and he dropped one of these on his thumb. Oh. So, as you can see, the port side of this boat is a walk around. Really nice to be able to get to all the fenders and what have you. Need fender hooks on these because he doesn't have railings. That would be a nice upgrade if somebody wanted to add stainless steel railings like these all the way down. I would probably have done that, but easy done. Portuguese bridge. Don't have any controls out here. Some of the boats have controls, but guess what? If you don't have controls out here, you don't have to worry about the corroding, breaking, and I just always drive these boats from the FlyBridge anyway, so easy access to the foredeck. Big locker here for lines. I always store my fenders in the dinghy up top. Monster great windlass. I mean, check this thing out, right? That's a little baby anchor, actually. If anybody wants to buy this boat and comes and buys it from me, I will throw in a 170-pound stainless steel Nordhavn CQR style anchor. I've got one in my garden, and it's got this boat's name written on it, whatever the name is when you buy it. I will throw that in, because that anchor's a bit weedy. It's really deserving of a beautiful Aerotex, by the way, same manufacturer as the David anchor. It's waiting for the next owner of this boat. Starboard. Oh, upper doors. I forgot to mention. This is nice, especially if you're in Florida, tying up on docks with pilings when the tide goes in and out. Obviously no good for us right now unless you want to go diving, but nice to have upper boarding doors.
And lower boarding doors. And there we have it. The profile of this boat is probably one of the best profiles of any Nordhavn, in my opinion. So, I'm James Knight, Yacht Tech, and that's my tour of the 57. I hope you found it useful, informative. I could talk about 57s probably, and 62s and lots of the other Nordhavns all day long. I get carried away sometimes, but sorry if it was long and boring. I'll see you down here when you come and take a look.